Well, hey, welcome to Coffee with Tyler, the show where we talk to banjoists around the globe about banjo-related things and music in general. Today, I'm really happy to have the great tenor banjo, bass, guitar, vocal extraordinaire, Don VAPPIE with us. Thanks, Don, for being here. Hey.
Thank you
Well,
very much. Thank you.
Yes. So, how have you been doing these days through all this COVID, Corona stuff?
I'm actually enjoying it. I mean, being home, my dog is really happy that I'm home.
Yeah.
But I started kind of coping by doing a Facebook Live every morning at 8 a.m. I do Coffee on the Porch with Don VAPPIE, and
Yeah.
got friends from around the world that just watch me sitting on my porch in my rocking chair and comments and talking, and they really look forward to it now. So this is my 44th day consecutive day doing it. And at 3 p.m. I go on and play a few songs for everybody. So been doing that for 44 days too. So
Cool, man. So let me just, start with some stock questions here. I know a lot of people would like to know this, including me. What age were you when you got started in music, and how did you get started?
I guess I was 6, but
Nice.
It was, I just spoke to someone about this. I think music has it has a social purpose in New Orleans.
Right.
It has function in society, so it's part of life. My family is sort of been in music since my great grandfather, at least, but they used to play together. I'm told, I found this out much later, like
Sure.
when they lived along the river in the 1800s, they would have a family meal on Sundays, and then they'd play together, and they all played string instruments. So in fact, my great uncle, Papa John Joseph, had the barbershop that was the meeting place for black musicians in the late 1800s. It was across the street from Buddy Bolden's house.
Wow.
So it's always been in the family, and even my mother, it's like this love for music, this realization, this acceptance that it's just part of our overall lives has always been there. So she was very supportive in my love for it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, what a great way to talk about that. I mean, what a natural connection you have to music, and really, from what it sounds like, kind of the birth of jazz. I mean, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. So let's see now, how'd you get started in banjo specifically, tenor banjo?
Well, I'd growing up in New Orleans, you hear them, and but putting all the other things aside,
Sure.
The first time I touched one,
Yeah.
it was in the late 70s, maybe 79. I was playing in a funk band because I played the music of my generation, Earth,
Sure.
Wind,
We all do.
Fire,
Yeah.
and all that.
Yeah.
And played guitar and bass, and I quit playing music. I got bored with trying to compete with disco, and that's where the band was going at the time. So I quit, and I thought maybe I'm tired of playing music, which turned out to be wrong. And 3 months later, I was back trying to play again, and I'd wake up and play along with a Kenny Burrell record. I was playing guitar a lot. So I got a job at a music store, Werlines for Music, which no longer exists, but we had some banjos hanging on the wall, tenor banjos. And I remember picking one up just to kind of care for it, play a little bit. And it reminded me of the muted single note lines that a guitar would play in a funk song. And
Sure.
it was like percussive. It was, the pitch was clear. And I just thought, wow, this is a cool sound. I could hear a place for the sound. So that's the first time I touched one. So I ended up getting one, and it was an old Maybell. I think I paid $300 for it or something from the store. But what's interesting is a friend of mine, Clarence Johnson III, great saxophonist, and he put me, he sent me this 10-day album challenge on Facebook. So I'm having to pick 10 albums, which is a whole lot more than 10. But
Yeah.
I always thought that my Kenny Burrell record had a banjo on it. I said, well, I remember Kenny played one tune on banjo, but it wasn't Kenny. It was John McLaughlin on Electric Dreams. He played a banjo solo.
Huh.
So that's one of my 10.
Cool.
John McLaughlin was definitely 10. I'm not sure I'm going to put Kenny in there because, I mean, he played a big part in my life, but I don't know if he's one of those 10 albums, you know?
Yeah. That's pretty, I'll have to check that out. I wasn't aware of that. That's really cool. Huh. Now, yeah, while we're on the subject, I mean, that's a perfect segue. Who are some of your biggest musical influences on banjo, but also music in general? And I know there's a lot, so you don't have to name them all, but just kind of off the top of your head,
John McLaughlin, that album really woke me up. Django Reinhardt, ton of New Orleans people, Gerald Adams, Placide Adams. I don't know if you know these people, but
yeah,
Justin Adams, Bob French, George French, Wendell Brunius. He's like one of my peers, but
wow, yeah,
some great players. Alice Marcellus,
sure, yeah.
All of the Marcelluses are great. Victor Goins.
Mm-hmm.
There's the New Orleans people. Teddy Riley was a trumpet player in New Orleans.
Sure, yeah.
Lloyd Lambert was a bass player.
Mm-hmm.
The Humphreys, Willie and Percy, a bunch of
yeah.
those guys. But then, Chick Corea, the Jazz Crusaders, Southern Comfort album, that was one of them. Santana.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I can, Earth, Wind, and Fire. I mean, geez, man, Charles Wright, the 103rd, Watts 103rd Street Rhythm Band.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I can go on.
Yeah, I grew up in Houston and lived there for a long, long time, and would go to New Orleans every once in a while and listen to some musicians. And it's funny, man, some of those names stand out. I also have some guys I've played with in Dallas and here in San Antonio. I know one of them, I think you might know. I'm not sure. Do you know a guy named Pierre Poirier?
Yes. Pierre and I, we were in my second garage band.
Cool.
In fact, I was 15. No, I might have been 15 years old maybe.
Yeah.
And I remember I went over to his house because he's about 3 blocks from me. I'm like, hey man, you want to be in the band? Oh, maybe he came to my house because we were practicing in the yard. We didn't have a garage, so we had a yard band. And
sure.
We'd all play through this one amp. We had a plush. And we'd all play through this amp, and Pierre knocked on the door. Said, man, can I be in your band? I said, yeah, come on.
Yeah.
But yeah, in fact, it's funny, man. The first album I ever did, self-produced, is called Papa Don's New Orleans Jazz Band. I should get it down and show you a
picture.
I
would love to see that. Yeah.
Can you wait a second?
Sure. Yeah. Take your time.
Let me get great. It. I did it at this house because I got the gig on the riverboat with the band.
Cool.
I mean, prior to that, and I might be jumping ahead here, but prior to that,
whatever you want.
My first real banjo gig, because I had played it on gigs. I brought, along with my guitar, I brought it, played a tune or so. And I tuned it like a guitar, the top 4.
Sure.
So my first banjo gig was on the riverboat Natchez. I strolled around. And the guy who had it before me was Vic Tooker. And Vic Tooker took over the band on the
Okay,
Knack.
that sounds.
So I took his job walking around.
Okay.
And then a year later or so, I got the band job. And that's when I decided I'd do an album to sell on the boat.
Sure.
So
yeah.
I did
Smart.
this Papa Don's New Orleans jazz
Oh
band
yeah.
record.
Yep. Yep.
And that's Pierre.
There he is, right there. Yeah, I see him.
Mhm.
That's him. That's for sure,
Yeah.
man.
And that's me with
too
my
cool.
derby.
Nice.
And that's my cousin Stanley Joseph. It's kind of reflecting in the light.
Yeah. No, that's cool. Yeah.
Maynard Chatters is still around. That's David Grillier. He died. We were on the road together when he died.
Okay.
And this is Henry Dejean. He died as well.
Yeah.
But
wow, man.
we all, this guy, me, and Pierre, we all ended up being in the funk band together. So.
Well, I know Pierre. Yeah, he was one of the first guys when I came down to San Antonio, actually, because he's in San Antonio now. Yeah, that's great, man. That's awesome. That's hilarious. Yeah, for some reason that rang a bell. I was going to be kind of embarrassed if you said you didn't know who he was, but I remember him because I played my tenor banjo sometimes with him for different things.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Hey, you ever heard of a cat named Don VAPPIE?" And I was like, "Yeah, I've met him once or twice." So anyways, that just stuck in my mind. But he's great, man, and he really spoke very highly of you, of course.
Man, his cousin is my best friend in life, man, and we've been
cool
since 6 years old, man. He's my brother, his family.
Oh, that's great.
And
yeah,
and Pierre's part of that, man. He's
kind of like you. I mean, he plays all kinds of styles. I mean, equally comfortable in funk, or I mean, whatever. He does it all.
Well,
and very fun.
I was going to say the very best track on this album, the best cut, is Pierre playing Burgundy Street Blues.
Oh, I mean, I'm gonna have to check that out at some point.
Killing. I mean, of all the things on here, that's the one thing I really, really like. And I'm very critical of myself, but
man, that is cool. I'll have to I'll give him a call this week and tell him you say hi.
Yeah.
That's cool. That is awesome. Well, that's cool, man. Yeah, New Orleans, man, is such a I mean, it's it for jazz.
Right,
I mean, that's it. I was reading Pops Foster's autobiography book, the other day again for like the fourth time, and I always learn something new when I read that book. Did you ever just trying to think who was still around? I mean, there is some legends that I'm sure you were you around, like Danny Barker or any of those guys, or I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of those guys still around for a while, right?
Actually, man, I played a concert in it was the early 90s. It might have been 1991, but I played bass on it. Winton came down here with his group. At the time, Sharnette Moffett was playing bass with him, with his
right.
quintet or sextet, whatever.
Uh-huh.
And we did a show at the Mahalia Jackson Theater, and there was a segment of it where Dr. Michael White played clarinet, Danny Barker played banjo, and I played bass in that group. And I also got to play with Howard Alden and Ruby Braff.
Oh, man.
Ellis played piano and Hurlin played drums.
Oh, yeah, Hurlin, right,
yeah. We were at sound check and, going over the tunes, and Danny has a 6-string banjo.
Mm-hmm. You have one of those handy? Yeah, there you go.
Like this.
Cool.
And almost exactly like this.
Yeah.
This is a 1921 Vega Fairbanks 6-string banjo.
The big
I don't know
head,
where the
too.
tools came from, but
yeah,
this is how I got it.
Nice.
And that's what Danny played. So when we went on the break, I put my bass down and walked by. I said, "Hey, Danny, it's a nice banjo, man." He said, and he looks up at me, goes, "Yeah." He says, "Here." He says, "Here, play. Here, check it out." And he handed it to me, and I picked it up, and I just kind of like, played a little something. And I went to give it back. He says, "Play it." And so, okay. So I played it a little longer, and
right.
And he kept looking at me. He's like looking at me, going like, What you think, huh? What you think? Huh? What you think? Like, I don't know. It's nice, man. It's nice, you know. But I mean, I look back at that moment because no one was interested in playing the banjo in New Orleans
Right.
because it had some. I mean, it had some Jim Crow connotations.
I understand. Yeah.
For black people, you know.
Right.
So, and that's part of my thing too, is realizing that the banjo is an evolution of an African instrument, you know, and
Sure. Yeah.
and wondering how can one group of people make another group of people hate something that belongs to them. So
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
my critical thinking, logical mind, because I'm a musician, musicians
Right.
have that, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So, you know, so I started playing the band, and I look back at that moment and think, you know, was Danny telling me to take this somewhere else? Because I don't really play like anybody here.
Right.
You know, I just
Right.
kind of went the way I thought I was supposed to go. So,
Yeah. No, that's interesting. Yeah. I can totally see that. Now you playing guitar. Now when did you decide to learn the or whatever switch or learn the tenor tuning?
well, I had it was a gig in the early 90s. It might have been like 94 or 5, mid 90s. And I got a call from Jazz at Lincoln Center to play a show about Jelly Roll Morton and Johnny Dodds tribute kind of thing.
Cool.
And in my research, I saw they played a 6-string banjo.
Mm-hmm.
So Danny wasn't playing so much because Danny Barker had been doing those shows.
Right.
So when I looked into it and started checking out the music, you know, I mean, really checking it out as opposed to just, yeah, I heard that.
Yeah.
And I realized that Johnny St. Cyr played a 6-string banjo. So I started looking for one. And I found this one that I just showed you over at Richelieu's shop in Madison, Wisconsin.
Wisconsin. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
And I called and he answered the phone. And I said, I'm looking for a 6-string banjo. He said, oh, I think I know somebody's got one. So
yeah, I'm sure he did.
know,
Yeah. He knew that one. All of them. Yeah.
Yeah, he ended up finding that one and I bought it from him. And so I played it. And then I came, you know, after all of that, one day I was working at Preservation Hall on Tuesdays and Fridays.
Okay.
And I thought, you know, I'm playing a 6-string. And one day I thought, well, hell, I got a 6-string and it's tuned like a guitar. So I wonder what it would be like to tune in fifths, like a tenor. So I sat here and tuned it in fifths and figured out how to play a major chord in, you know, like with the bass note on the C string and on the G string.
Okay.
And then major and minor like that.
Sure.
And then I just went to work that night.
Yeah.
It just, you know, I'll figure it out. And
right.
It's kind of like diving in the pool, you know, can you swim? I don't know. Let's see. So
yeah,
that's what I did.
Cool.
And to some degree, every time I pick it up, I'm diving.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
So
that's cool, man. Yeah. I was always curious about that, you know, when, and why, you know, you went over, because a lot of people are fine playing with the guitar tuning or even the guitar banjo. And it's funny, you know, you mentioned Johnny St. Cyr. I don't think a lot of people realize that guitar banjo, 6-string banjo was around, you know, that long ago. Some people see it now and they think it's like a cop out or something. And it's like a new thing. I'm like, no, I mean, there's a lot of guys that played it back in the teens and 20s, you know.
yeah,
it's very authentic for certain things.
I mean, this one is 1921 and it's after Vega and Fairbanks joined together. Because I mean,
right.
They were, you know.
Exactly. Yeah, that's cool. Okay, very interesting. So now, you talked about a little bit about, you mentioned Wynton, and what's it like to work with him? I know a lot of our listeners are familiar with that name, even if they don't know as much about some of these other names we're talking about. So probably good to talk about.
Well, I mean, the difference is when you do shows in New York, you know, or when you're traveling with a group and you're touring, I mean, it's kind of like a different world than being in New Orleans, where you got to pull teeth to get together to rehearse a little bit, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, sometimes you have to rehearse. I mean, there's the Preservation Hall model where you don't have to rehearse. And, you know, I've always had a love-hate relationship with New Orleans in that, as at one point they used to say, yeah, well, mediocre is good enough, you know? And
Yeah. Right.
that's not quite true. It's more like what I said earlier in terms of music is just one part of life, and it has a social function and purpose in society. And sometimes it's just one of those things you do after you have your meal. You just get together and play or something. I mean, that's sort of a life tradition that has continued
Sure.
for more than 100 years, you know, and now we have a profession. So we play for money and stuff. But
good point.
Playing with Winton, like for instance, I'll do a show, a Friday, Saturday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday shows. I'll fly up there on Monday. We rehearse from 10 o'clock to 6 o'clock, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. You know, breaks for lunch and stuff, but it's always new music or it's new arrangements, and you have parts to play. Yeah. And if it's the New Orleans stuff, sometimes I kind of know it, or there've been times when I've gone up and done some other things, and it's been stuff I'm not really familiar with, and I'll just be up all night making sure I can play this stuff, right? So, but it's
right.
It's always a joy, man, to play with such high level musicians. You know,
yeah,
it's just,
man.
I love it.
It's a lot of yeah. I mean, there's some.
I've always, but
I've
even
been
in my life, when I had my own, when I had my own bands, I wanted everybody in the band to be better than me. Because, you know, I want to do like this monkey. I want to climb up.
You want to go up.
I want to be reaching. Yeah.
I think a mutual friend of ours, Buddy Wachter, that he told me one time the same thing. He said, you always want to be like the worst guy in the band. You know, if you're ever the best guy in the band, then it's about time to move on to another band. So I totally know what you mean about that.
Yeah.
But and I've never had a problem. Like, I don't know. I mean, I've never been intimidated by better musicians. That's what I want to be around. You know, I think it's kind of maybe the same if you're an athlete. I mean, you don't want to be the best football player on your team. You know, you want to have some other guys around you can learn from, and talent, and inspiration. But incidentally, talking about Buddy Wachter, that's a fun memory for me, is getting to jam with you and him. I think even there's another guy there, Jürgen Kulis, who's a friend of mine from Germany. I'm remembering. I have a photo of it. And Jürgen's a big expert on all the Harry Reeser stuff. And anyways, we were jamming there at the vendor room, I think, in Providence, Rhode Island. And as you're like right around 2005 or so, before Katrina hit, I think. Mm-hmm. That was a fun memory for me. But let's talk about that a little bit, because being in New Orleans, I mean, you were there when that hit, right?
I was actually right after the Providence, Rhode Island thing. I played with the Creole Jazz Serenaders in Bangor, Maine.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So my wife and I we had never driven that area, so we drove up. And yeah, that's where we were. And that was interesting, because there's another group, Beau Soleil, a Cajun band, who were, hybrid Cajun band, I guess.
Yeah.
But they were there as well. And I remember sitting in the lobby of the hotel looking at the weather radar with David Doucet and saying, okay, my trees are going to fall this direction, so my house should be okay. It's like,
man,
kind of weird, but
yeah,
I was right, man. None of them hit the house.
Man.
But
jeez.
That was the weirdest memory about that, is that Continental Airlines, that's how everybody flew up. That was my favorite airline back then. But Continental called me, and the guy says, Mr. VAPPIE, I have 6 reservations in a group under your name, and New Orleans Airport has indefinitely closed. Where would you like to go? I didn't know what to say, man. I said, I don't know. I can call you back. He says, no, I need to know now. So I don't know if you remember this movie, Spies Like Us.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
did exactly what Chevy Chase did. I said, well, if you really, I can, if you want, and the guy's like, hello, hello. And I just hung up, you know, so.
That's great, man. That is, wow. Wow, what a memory. Yeah, that, I had some family actually that were affected by that. My uncle, I don't know, maybe he recorded in the studio, maybe not, but my uncle is named Steve Reynolds, and he was part of
Yeah.
what, Ultrasonic Studios.
Yes, I know Steve.
Yeah, man, that's my uncle.
Your uncle?
Yep, and they had to, that devastated him,
Oh, yeah.
and they lost it. I mean, a lot of people lost it. That was one personal connection I had that was pretty rough, and I don't know, man. Like another buddy of mine, I was living in the Dallas area at the time, and I played this great piano player who was from New Orleans his whole life, and he had gone up there just coincidentally to help take care of his mom in Dallas. I mean, and that hit while he was in Dallas, and he lost everything. So he just decided to stay in Dallas, and that's how I met. His name was John Banks. I don't know if you know him, but he played like at the famous Door Forever and with Brian Lee and some of those kind of guys in New Orleans. But anyways, but I mean, so selfishly, I was glad I got to meet him because of that, because that's the reason we became, lifelong friends. But man, I just remember that, and being from Houston, we had a lot of people, come to Houston after that. But yeah, that was rough, man. I mean, what did that do? I mean, just for people maybe that are listening, that we might have some younger listeners that aren't really even aware of that, or maybe some people that didn't live geographically near, that didn't understand the economic and all the other implications. But what did that do to the gig scene? Not only economically, but did a lot of people leave New Orleans after that you knew of, or did new people come in? Or, I mean, just give us like an idea kind of how the hurricane affected the music scene from your perspective.
Well, what happened, everything closed.
Yeah.
It's kind of like right now, but,
right.
But back then we kind of saw we knew why. We could see it. Can't see it now. It's a virus. But a lot of people left and were taken places as opposed to going somewhere. And people that were, I don't know, small business owners, self-employed people, laborers like bricklayers, contractors, carpenters. I mean, these are people who, it's always put on the lower middle class to pay all the bills for the city, taxes. It's always, anyway, without a middle class in society, things have problems. And that's what happened, man. It's like people worried about all the poor, which is, we have to. They worried about poor people, forgot all about those people in the middle who had to leave. They had to continue paying their mortgages in New Orleans.
Right.
They had to pay mortgages somewhere else. So some of them a good number of them just didn't come back and abandoned the houses in New Orleans. And, so there's a lot of new people moved in, and people that weren't connected culturally to New Orleans. So in that respect, there's sort of a change in just having people here that grew up in the culture, that understood why things happen the way they happen. So, I mean, things were changing anyway, but Katrina was a real catalyst in that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd never seen a bluegrass band on Royal Street or nothing. You see them now, you know. I mean,
Right.
or even bands playing classic arrangements of Jelly Roll Morton or somebody like that. Or Noble Sissel Band when Sidney Bechet was in it. You see bands playing that now because they're coming from New York or some other place. Kids move here, you know, it's an opportunity. And I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying it's different.
Different. Yeah.
It's just different. So things, instead of changing, you know, like slowly, it just kind of went.
Yeah.
And which direction you say is whatever, but
right. I get it.
As usual, man. As usual, money is always the issue when you come to things like that. So, I remember the first thing they did after Katrina was worry about the Superdome coming back. Saints got to start playing. You know, I mean, schools are falling apart. We still had public schools without air conditioning, so there was some, you know, thought about that. But,
right.
But I mean, yeah, that's life.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, hearing how I think what you're getting at is like there's this real natural progression of things, very organic, and then something like that happens, and now it just totally changed everything.
Yeah,
not all for the bad, but just different, you know.
It changes. It really changes.
Yeah,
And you know, I think it was. You know, my wife's a historian, so I remember being in South Carolina and going to a conference, and Alan Jabor was there. And he said this thing about culture being fluid and how it's like rivers meeting and the water just mixes and you can't tell after a while, you don't know which river it came from. So that's kind of what happens. But New Orleans is such a different place than the rest of America. You know, it's the most northern part of the Caribbean.
Right.
So,
yeah, man.
It changed a bit, man. And then part of that's our fault for not defining who we are. And part of that not defining it is being rooted in government-sponsored racism as Jim Crow, and it's just a big, you know, it is what it is. And here we are.
Right. Yeah. No, thanks for your perspective on that. I think that's going to be really interesting to a lot of the people that are watching this. You know, I'm 34, and I mean, I was actually when that happened. I was at a banjo festival in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, of all places, and but I don't know, maybe 19, something like that. So I forget that there's a lot of people, younger musicians and stuff nowadays, that don't even really remember that. So thanks for, you know, sharing your perspective on that. You know,
64. So
yeah. I mean, yeah. You know, what I'd like to do is get your perspective on the role of the tenor banjo in the trad jazz band specifically, because I had and maybe we can talk some technique stuff. I know we're getting kind of short on time here, but let's kind of segue into that. I know for me, I had a big wake-up call. I had grown up playing a lot of real showy banjo stuff, you know, kind of soloistic stuff, and, you know, very square, you know. But it's its own, I guess you could say, art form in itself. You know, it's, you know, kind of entertaining, that sort of thing. But I remember, man, I was playing with some musicians in Houston one time and got hired to play in a trad band. And the guy turns to me, I was maybe 15 or 14, and he goes, on the first break, he goes, you're playing way too much. You know, you're playing way too busy. Just play ching, 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 ching. And I was like, you know, I'm sitting there thinking, you know, as an immature musician, I'm thinking the more I play, the better they're going to think I am. And, you know, totally not thinking about my role in the band, you know. And it hurt my feelings, of course, like it does sometimes, just briefly. But I thought, okay. And that really sent me down a road where I started listening to a lot of the all the black bands, in the 20s, and I mean, a lot of Louis Armstrong stuff, even in different stuff too, not just the traditional Hot 5, Hot 7 instrument like Fletcher Henderson, all kinds of stuff from that time period. And really getting a sense of, wow, the way the tenor banjo, to me at least, was played was it just had this percussive, straightforward kind of rhythm, and it didn't show off a whole lot. You had cornet and clarinet and trombone and all those guys taking solos. Every once in a while, you get a cool banjo solo. But could you explain to people out there how you approach tenor banjo in a trad jazz band specifically?
Okay. Well, I mean, I was told the same thing when I started playing.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
You don't have to do all of that. And I said, okay. And when they left, I went back to doing what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
So there's a way of doing that without getting in the way of everything else. And if you think about it, that's more in line with the Caribbean influence. As my wife said to me one time, she says, you play more like a Caribbean banjo player than a New Orleans banjo player. And I said, well, what do you mean? She says, well, they just play plump, 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 real plain, and you play all these different rhythms. And she says, I like what you do better. But what she meant, see, I do all of that, but in the context of the song. If you're getting in the way of something, then back off or come down, But you don't want to, you still have a role to play in the band. Mm-hmm. And tenor banjo, if the piano's doing a whole lot, well, then you can't do a whole lot. You got to, if the piano's not there, maybe you can do, but don't do that, ding 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 ding, that kind of stuff, I mean, you can fill some space if it's there, but otherwise you play, and even in the context of playing 4, you can be creative. Ding 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 da. I mean, you could, play short, play long, crescendo, dynamics. So all of that plays into it.
Yeah.
One thing about the tenor that I think is my theory, tenor tuning is so open. Mm-hmm. I think it cuts through the horns better, and you don't have to play so hard. Right. You don't have to play loud, because that voicing, it's you across 2 octaves. A 4-note chord is across 2 octaves.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
Octave and a half if you're doing just 3 notes or something.
Sure.
Well, that's one thing I thought.
Yeah. Well, that's very refreshing to hear you say that, because I feel like when you're playing in a trad jazz band specifically, or whatever you want to call it, you're in danger sometimes of people treating it too much like almost like classical music. Like you have to play within these guidelines, and it takes some of the fun out of it, And there are times where I listen back to recordings from the 20s, and they're not always, I mean, a lot of times they're playing really cool, hip, rhythmic stuff. And it feels good to hear that. I'm like, okay, but like you said, it's real, for me, important takeaways, as long as you're not, clashing, if there's space to fill it. But
it's more of understanding your role in the band as opposed to playing a certain part. I mean, and there's parameters to everything. I mean, that was the whole premise behind the Jazz and Democracy thing we did at Kennedy Center with Winton. It's like jazz is very democratic, but it relies upon good faith by all the participants. Nobody's trying to cheat their way around here, but there are some basic parameters. I mean, we got the form of the song. Sure. That's a parameter. Right. I mean, in democracy, we complete absolute freedom is chaos. So we create laws so that we don't infringe upon each other's freedoms. but you still can do pretty much what you want. But there's lines we don't want to cross. And in the terms of a band in New Orleans jazz, whether it's the early New Orleans jazz or whether it's the revival period, what people call trad bands now, I mean, there's still a role to play. And if the horns are so busy, you know, sometimes they don't understand the role. Sometimes they just play chaotic. There's a melody going to clarinet with no connection to flying around that melody, you know, or the trombone just playing whatever they want, you know what I mean? Or the piano just striding away no matter what happens, or the piano. One thing I used to hate as a bass player was a piano player playing bass lines.
Right.
Damn, bro.
I know.
Have a lot of choices, you know?
Right.
As a bass player, get out of my way.
I know what you mean, man. That is frustrating.
But having said that, man, New Orleans jazz is really, it's not an easy music to play if you don't understand how it works. So in saying that, what I'm saying is it was so innovative that it spread the world in the early in 1900. I mean, it spread the world without radio, without, I don't know if I said this already, but that's just amazing. And to me, when I see a band in Russia or in the middle of nowhere in Japan or something, not that Japan is nowhere, but I've seen bands in these small towns that you think, how did they even get a banjo or something, you know?
Right.
And sometimes they just don't sound that great, you know what I mean? But the point is, as a New Orleanian, I choose to be very proud of the fact that they're trying to imitate something that came from my hometown. I mean, to me, that's like the greatest honor in the world. Yeah. And if you look at it that way, then, you know, I mean, because everybody's going to be different, man. Everybody comes up. I can't play some music out of someone else's culture the way they can play it. Right. I can try, but it's more than just playing a song. It's understanding what happens with that song. How is it connected to your culture? What do you do what do you feel when you hear that song? Because it's connected. And that's what New Orleans is, man.
That's great, man. Well, thanks, man. I know we're kind of probably out of time here, but I would love if you're up for it. Maybe I could talk you into playing us out with something. You know, I don't know, whatever you feel like. Maybe Buddy Bolden Blues or something along those lines. Anything you want, really. I'm just throwing out some ideas, but
I got a chance to play with Bela Fleck in New York for this banjo thing. It was really cool because we're showing 5 of us, all different styles of banjo.
Oh, cool.
You know, him and Abigail, Tony Trishka, and Seamus Egan.
Yep.
Played Irish stuff, and I played New Orleans stuff. So I'll play a tune I did there because it was a New Orleans tune from the Sam Morgan band called Bogalusa Strut.
All right, man. Well, I'll wrap this up here and turn it over to you. So, guys, thanks so much for joining us here with Coffee with Tyler. I want to thank Don for taking the time out of his day, and just a real honor to talk to one of the greats. So when you're ready, Don, take it away.
Thank you very much. All right, Bogalusa Strut.